Hello guys, welcome to today's video. In this video we are going to talk about studying in the US for an MBA versus studying in the Europe for an MBA. We'll talk through certain facts and figures to understand what is probably that right decision for you. Also, I'm going to give you my verdict towards the end, so stay tuned and understand all the factors independently. Let us get started right away with the most important factor, that is placements. Yes, if you are actually going and looking at a business school, it's all about placements, right? What is your post-MBA career going to look like? Let us look at some statistics. If we look at the placement reports from the top US business schools, it clearly indicates that more than 90 to 95% of the class is going to stay back in the US for their post-MBA job. Well, for Kellogg it is around 92%, for Columbia it is around 95%, and for Darden it is 98% of the students get their post-MBA jobs in the US. If we compare the same scenario with European B schools, only 40 to 50% of the students stay back in Europe for their post-MBA jobs, and others go to Australia, Singapore, probably they return back to their home countries for their post-MBA jobs. And another interesting fact is that if you are looking to get an MBA from Europe and get a job in US, well, that's going to be super difficult because less than 5% of the folks doing an MBA from Europe actually go on to work in the US. So if working in US is one of your primary reasons for getting an MBA, you should stick to a US business school. If you are a little more flexible with respect to your work location post MBA, then you can also consider European business schools. Okay. Now moving on to the second factor, that is, hey, we understand what we are going to do after MBA. Let us also look at what does it cost for us to do an MBA. The European business schools typically are at least 30 to 35%, and in some cases even 40% cheaper than getting an MBA from US business school. This is purely because of the fact that majority of the business schools offer 1-year programs in Europe, whereas in the US that corresponding number is 2 years. Well, then of course your tuition cost comes down and also your living expenses comes down. If cost is one of the primary factors in your decision making regarding where you want to study, then you need to think very hard about the European business schools. Now moving on to the third factor, the class composition. This is super interesting because if you look at the average age of an MBA class in European business schools, it is typically 29 or 30. Whereas if you look at the same number in US business schools, it is 26 years, 27 years, or 28 years. And the reason for that is the undergrad programs in Europe are typically 3 years. So folks immediately go on to do their master's program after undergrad and then work for a few years before coming back to an MBA school. Whereas in the US, the undergrad schools are 4-year programs. So folks do not do another additional master's before jumping into their business school. And the difference of that master's degree, which is typically 2 years for a European student, adds up to that overall age number that we are looking at. So this does not indicate that, hey, if you have higher work experience, apply to a European program, or if you have lower work experience, apply only to an American program. That is a complete myth and you should not believe in that. The underlying reasons are related to the educational systems within these two different geographies. The fourth thing that I want to talk about is the networking aspect. Because these MBA programs in the US are for 2 years, you get a lot more networking opportunities when compared to a European business school where the average course duration itself is 1 year. And in terms of European business school, majority of your classmates are spread out around the world. So networking becomes even more tougher, logistically speaking, for a European business school program when you compare it with the American business school program. One other factor which is always on top of mind for a lot of folks is the language requirements. If you want to study in Europe, to make it super clear, you don't need to know French, you don't need to know Spanish, you don't need to know German before you get into any of the business schools in Europe. So there is another popular myth which I want to address. That is, do you need to know the local language? To set that straight, you don't need to know French, Spanish, German or Italian to actually go and do an MBA in Europe. However, knowing that local language might help you in that final interview process. If you are looking at an international school like INSEAD, HEC Paris, or Oxford, Cambridge, these things don't matter as much because you tend to work at international locations post your MBA. It could be Australia, Singapore, Dubai, London, Amsterdam, any of these places. But if you are looking at other European business schools, knowing that local language really helps you. Well, if you look at the placement report for some of these European business schools, it will indicate what percentage of the students are staying back in the same country, and that will give you a clear indication of yes, will knowing the local language really help me versus not. And if you are not proficient in the local language, would strongly recommend to pick an international school over a local school. Moving on, the core concepts that you learn in the classroom are nothing different even if it's a 1-year MBA program from Europe or a 2-year MBA program from the US. Okay? The underlying difference lies in the fact that the case studies, the examples that are taken in the classroom are very, very US centric for American business schools, and they are little more international for European business schools. Because folks tend to go and work across geographies post their MBAs in Europe, the European business schools also make a conscious effort. They build the examples and case studies discussed in the classroom to be a little more international, right? So if you are looking at the core content itself, nothing differentiates the both, but in terms of the examples, a lot of differences. So moving on, let us talk through the visa issues, right? If you are going to a top business school and if you are going to work for a top organization, these organizations will take care of your visa issues. Absolutely, you don't have to worry about that. If you don't have your H1B picked up, for example, they'll probably send you to Canada and work there for a year and come back to the US, right? The same thing applies for European business schools. You don't have to worry as long as you are studying in a top business school and also going to work for a good brand. If you take a step back, if these things don't happen, then what about it? Correct? American business schools are now more and more STEM certified. What that means for you is that, hey, even if your H1B or even if your visa doesn't get picked up in the lottery, you still get to work for 3 years because you have studied in the US. Now, until a few years back, that was only 1 year. So it was creating a lot of anxiety among Indian students who are going to do MBA in the US. In the UK and in the other parts of Europe, these visa restrictions are also getting eased. You don't have to worry about what is happening in the Brexit world or what Trump has done to your visa chances. Okay, MBA schools are becoming more and more aware of the fact that, hey, there is a lot of cost involved. So they do want to shield their international students as much as possible from these visa issues. And the final point which I want to touch upon is the importance of brand with respect to the geography itself. If you can get into the top brand, please prioritize that over a geography itself. So these brands tend to stick with you in the long run on your resume. So take a decision according to what brands you can get into versus not, rather than basing it on geography. So to summarize, the first point, European MBAs are less expensive compared to their counterparts in the US. And if you are looking forward to work in the US, apply for a American B school. Number 2, the language is not a barrier for you to apply to a business school in Europe if you are applying for a top business school, neither to get in nor to get a job. Number 3, your absolute amount of work experience should not determine where you are applying. You can still apply for an American business school if you have a lot of work experience, and you can apply to European business schools if you have lower amount of experience too. Okay, take these points into consideration and then take a call around where you need to apply. If I were to pick up, these are the 3 factors based on which I will make my final decision. Hope you like the video, guys. Please like the video and also subscribe to the channel so that YouTube gods will help us in growing at a good rate. Thank you so much. Take care.